welcome to AML Gray Matters. Today is Wednesday, 30th of March, 2022. I'm your host, Kimberly Smith, co-founder of Silo Compliance System and a former compliance officer and MLRO myself. I want to welcome our live audience. It's exciting to see our audience from all over the world. I mean, we have people from Pakistan, Egypt, UK, Latin America, all over the Caribbean. So welcome all of you. I also see lots of Silo Compliance System users. So I recognize many of your names from training and welcome. Today we have Ulrich de la Paz, and he is joining us from beautiful Curacao. Welcome, Ulrich.
Thank you, Kimberly, and it's a real pleasure actually to join you on this session. And we look forward to giving informative information regarding sanction screening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a hot topic indeed. Ulrich and we met probably 7 years ago. I can't remember if it was either at a CRCA event or an ACAMS event. And although we can't remember exactly when or where we met, one thing Ulrich and I can both agree that we have never seen global events impact the AML compliance function as much as world events are today. I think the Arab Spring in 2020 was the closest, and it doesn't even come close to comparing with what is happening today. Hundreds of sanctions are being issued, and for the international financial centers and anyone with a global client list, you're operating in a minefield right now. So no pressure at all. And as we all know, and as we all know, fines against businesses are not issued because a bank or firm is found guilty of laundering money. They are fined because if you pay attention to the wording of penalty notices, they are fined for lack of appropriate AML systems being in place. So that's one of our goals today, is to help you make sure you have those systems in place on the sanctions screening side. So as an owner, manager, or compliance professional, you need to be able to demonstrate to your regulatory authorities how you are complying with your AML obligations. That includes showing how, when you screened your clients or customers against sanctions, who reviewed them, and so on. Ulrich is a sanctions manager at a financial institution in Curacao, and he has also been dealing with sanctions and has very generously offered to share his experience with us. So again, thank you, Ulrich. Before we do begin, though, I want to remind our audience that this webinar is not legal advice. We will take questions from the live audience at the end, and we encourage your questions. I've even had somebody email me one in advance, which is awesome. I appreciate that. Today's webinar will last approximately 1 hour. Certificates will be auto-generated and sent to you via email approximately 1 hour after the end of the broadcast. I do have one handout today. It's some homework that I'm going to give you guys at the end. I'll explain that. And of course, the recording of this broadcast and the slides will be sent to you. We usually get that out on Friday. So do keep an eye on your emails for that. I do have a few polling questions for our live audience. Thomas, if you can go ahead and launch the first one. Your responses do help us know who is listening in and address some of the issues you may be facing. It also gives us an idea of some of where you're at with the sanctions. So do please take a moment to respond, because these do help us. A big thanks, Tom, to you as well, for who's working behind the scenes managing these polls. All right, so the first one is, we're asking you, are you specifically dealing with the sanctions on a day-to-day basis? We just kind of wanted to know if we have some real sanctions experts out there, or if you're just kind of generally responsible. All right, so it looks like reviewing sanctions is part of your job, but you have other responsibilities. And 42% of you are showing that you oversee the compliance obligations, so you don't do the day-to-day. So I hope we can help both of you, both areas. And of course, a couple of you are also saying that you do sanctions specifically and personally. So that's great. Go on to the next one, Tom. All right. So I'm asking here, how are you doing your sanctions? Are you doing it manually? Do you do kind of batch reviews? Is it automatic? You have a screening provider, or maybe even you've created your own tool, or maybe you're not sure. Okay, I'm not surprised. I am seeing about 25% right now are saying manually, and just over 50% saying you have a automatic screening provider. Less than 10% right now are showing batch reviews. Okay, and A few of you have your own tool. Great. 8% unsure. All right. That's kind of that's about what I've seen. I'm actually a little surprised. I thought I've seen more manual processes, but of course that just could be the people that I talk to. But our audience, yeah. So we got a good mix there. And one more before we go on. And who do you screen? Do you just screen your customers or your clients by their names, or are you screening also any transactions, third parties doing transactions? Do you dig down, screen into directors and shareholders, any vendors and contractors? And this is multi-select, by the way, so go ahead and you can tick off as many there as you need. I would hope 100% will respond to customers and clients. The number's almost there. It's good. All right. 47% of you are showing that you screen employees, so that's good. I've had a lot of people say that they weren't screening employees. Awesome. Those numbers look really good, by the way. So I don't know, Tom, if you want to go ahead and show that as well. So 38% screening vendors and contractors. So that might be something that you go away and look at, see if you do need to be, more of you need to be screening your vendors and contractors. All right, thank you very much for your responses. So we're going to kick off with some sanctions basics. I think most of you probably know some of the basics. Ulrich, do you want to kind of kick off and explain some of the basics here?
Yeah, sure. Welcome to our audience also and joining us on this session. What are sanctions? Basically, sanctions are restrictions that our government bodies or international organizations can put on certain countries, individuals, in order for them to change their behavior. Maybe it's from terrorist acts, maybe human trafficking, or you name it. You see, you can just, yeah, a recent example is Russia invading Ukraine. So these are some sanctions that can change actually the behavior or the thinking of any country or government by doing things that are not allowed actually, and it's yeah, against the legal moral obligation of normal daily days. So that is in a nutshell what it is basically.
Yeah, I like to kind of say it's like a political tool to kind of help, as you say, change the behavior of other governments.
Yes, actually,
or individuals. Yeah,
that's in a nutshell. It's a simple way to put it forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, and of course, those who issue the sanctions, we talk about the big four: OFAC, HO Treasury, United Nations, and the EU list. But of course, every government issues sanctions.
Yeah.
So that's depending on where you live.
Exactly. So, like for instance, if I take our government, it's we are tied to the Kingdom of Netherlands, so we are obliged basically to follow also the EU rules. So so we need to have those degrees, ministerial degrees, in order to hand out, in order to take care of those sanctions parties that may have any accounts or relationship with our island. So basically, everybody along the world needs to have, basically any government needs to have like a sanction regulations, for instance.
Right.
That's me it.
And the different types of licenses, because even though, and this is something that I had to learn, even though there might be a sanctions against an entity or usually a particular company, there are certain licenses that you can obtain. Now, do you deal a lot with the different licenses, Ulrich, in your role as a sanctions manager?
Sometimes you will get basically you have two types of licenses. You can have a general license, which is mainly brought forward by the OFAC, and saying, okay, what type of transactions is allowed. But on the other hand, also a third party can request also a license in order to do a transaction. For instance, let me just give an example. For instance, you have been dealing with a company in Cuba, for instance, Okay, we know that US dollar transaction is not allowed to Cuba. So basically, you will ask the US government in order you to give you a license in order to do transactions with that particular company, which is for sure you need to prove that is to the benefit of that company and not to the government of Cuba. So, and then you will get you will be allowed actually to do that transaction or a couple of transactions in that role of that specific range of the license. So you need to be very specific what you are requesting a license for, what type of transaction it is, in order for you to do the transaction. Otherwise, that transaction will not be processed basically by any bank. That's
Right.
mainly what it is.
And my understanding, like a general license, for instance, might be like medical supplies. You can still send medical supplies to a particular country for humanitarian reasons. And a
Exactly.
specific license is like, for instance, I was reading about Roman Abramovich and how he's been sanctioned, can't sell the Chelsea Football Club, but there could be a specific license that's issued. I'm not saying there is, but there could be one, not necessarily
Yeah.
by OFAC, but maybe by the HM Treasury. They could
Yeah.
also issue a specific license, so that transaction, that sale of the Chelsea Football Club could happen. And so I think anybody who would be involved in that transaction would have to, have sight of uh, that specific license in order to proceed with the type of with that transaction. Is that understanding correct?
Yeah, that's the correct understanding under that. So basically, you need there are certain leeways that are you can name it leeway, but okay, transactions must be done, and for sure for humanitarian aids and so on, those are the ones that are not sanctions. But in and that is where when you're doing transaction or customers are doing transactions, you must be very diligent in giving the right description in order not for those transactions to be stopped and be checked further. So it's many times you will see that details in the transaction will lack in order for these transactions to be stopped and be blocked and sent to OFAC, and then there's a whole other process for to be done in order to release those funds. So it's at the end of the day, basically what we are going back is certain type of transaction, humanitarian aids, helping, like for instance, right now we have COVID, we have still COVID, like vaccines and so on. All these type of transactions, masks and so on, are allowed basically related to this type of aids to these sanctioned countries, so-called sanctioned countries, that these types of transactions are allowed. Basically, these are
Okay.
general licenses.
Okay. Fantastic. And then some of the sanctions lists that we were also going over, of course, we've also mentioned the big four, OFAC, which is the US sanctions list, HM Treasury in the UK, EU, and UN. And you had mentioned this to me, and I didn't realize this, as far as like Cuba is on the OFAC list, or a lot of Cuban nationals and businesses, but not necessarily on HMT EU, HM Treasury EU, or the United Nations list. And you were also talking about some US dollar sanctions, again, something that I was not familiar with. Can you explain a little bit more about the US dollar sanctions evasion risk?
Yeah. So basically, what it is the main aspect of this particular sanction is from the U.S. against Cuba. So
Mhm.
you know that the US dollar transactions in general are not allowed to Cuba. So probably what you will do is, like for instance, we are in the Dutch Caribbean. We do have a lot of ties with Europe, and yeah, you can see that you will do a transaction so-called with Cuba via a euro, so using euros. But if the correspondent bank in Europe will see that a transaction is maybe like a US sanction evasion, so probably they will not do that transaction. Like I can just give you an example. Okay, like somebody is going to Cuba, and they need to pay for their stay in Cuba, like a hotel or whatever. They will do it in euro, but the payment you are using, for instance, like a US company to do the payment. So because of that, you will see the correspondent bank can do a research on that particular payment and see, okay, there is a US element in this payment. So for instance, we will not do this payment. So they will send the payment back, or they will say we will not do this payment. So
Okay.
in that sense, it's very difficult for us, like for instance in the Caribbean, to do business with Cuba. Also, although you are allowed basically to do business in the other type of currencies. So, but yeah, the correspondent banks are very cautious by doing these type of transactions in order not to be involved in like U.S. sanctions invasions, and because of the extraterritorial programs that the U.S. has, they are still maybe tied to complying with these U.S. so-called U.S. sanctions. So it's a very difficult term, but that will put a position basically that customer cannot easily do a transaction to Cuba while you're thinking, okay, I cannot do transactions in dollars, but I can do it in maybe Canadian dollar or in euros. But it's not easy. It's not so easy just
Right.
because
Okay.
of the U.S. Invasion, so sanction evasion. Sorry.
Okay. So even if, like, for instance, if I was a lawyer working on a transaction that involved, like I said, one foreign company doing business with a Cuban company, completely legal, you're still that risk of if there's any kind of U.S. dollar
Yes, U.S.
transactions
element.
involved, yeah, of it not
Yes,
going through.
yes, the part of the U.S. element. So if there is any U.S. element in that, if they
Hmm.
feel that there is any U.S. element, they might say, okay, I'm not going to do this transaction. So
Okay.
it's
So
really difficult.
this kind of explains too why, for instance, like I'll use Cayman as an example because I used to live there, and like even though Cayman's a UK territory, um, the businesses that operate there would still have to be very careful with transacting, like UK companies operating in Cuba as an example.
Exactly,
Because even
exactly.
though I guess they're not, that's the reason why they still check OFAC lists and things like that. Okay, interesting.
Correct, correct.
All right, so I'm just going on to the next one. So we kind of talked about the different lists, and of course, in the title of today's webinar, we did talk about, we said sanction screening because that is where so many people are having a challenge right now, whether it's manual, whether you've got automated systems in place. And these are some of the issues as well that I've kind of been helping our users with of Silo. So you can have different, manual, automated, a batch, depending on the size of your firm, the type of your firm. Obviously, like a larger bank, like what you do, Ulrich, you have probably a lot more automated systems in place. Plus, you have that transaction monitoring going on.
Yeah,
But a smaller firm might still be doing it very manually. And that is
exactly.
these Russian sanctions, what's going on in the world today, that's just, it's overwhelming, even a small firm, the manual systems that they had in place.
You,
So, of course, and then there's also that
even
ongoing monitoring. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
yes, no, I'm just saying. So just by that saying that you're a small company and seeing all those sanctions coming, maybe sometimes you think, okay, are these touching me maybe one day, or you
Hmm.
never know too. So and that's kind of makes it a little bit tricky. So and
Right.
the other thing is, and the most important thing is manual automated batch. Um, at the end of the day, it's all about the cost of the compliance, so the sanction. So if you
Right.
are a small company, you might think, okay, do I need to invest basically in a search of automated filtering?
Hmm.
So, and there comes up a very big question.
Yeah,
related
yeah,
to
and some of these solutions, just a screening solution itself, they do have, their minimums. They can be pretty pricey. And we have seen that as well. The other thing I've seen too, people who are relying on a manual system, they might also say, well, I'm just going to look at all my Russian clients, and see if they are, see if any of them, I'll just kind of just narrow down and look at them. But then I was reading, I think it was last week, it's a Scottish LP, limited partnership, that has Mauritius shareholders. They got sanctioned by OFAC, I think last week or a couple of weeks ago, and put on the Russian sanctions list, even though it's not a Russian company. And I thought, well, if you're doing something very manual, you'd miss that. If you were just looking at your Russian related clients, you would actually miss that particular Scottish company. So I thought that was very interesting. And again, one of those pitfalls that people can see.
yes, and to add to that, basically, by missing that, you need these Russians are so-called listed entities or individuals. They will look for alternatives, and
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
by saying that is basically they will have some people or in the other individuals fronting for them,
Hmm.
and it's at okay, I'm looking at my client, but do you know who's behind your client specifically?
Right.
And just going back to see like the 50% rule, that's a difficult part, in seeing the sanctions related 50%. It's you need to go back into your customer to see who's in the back of them, and to see if they are fronting or not, and
Right.
in a such a way that you are not dealing with like sanctioned customers. You might, so you never know. So those are the negative points by maybe looking at a manual process, looking at okay, those individuals are my customers, but do I need to go a little bit further into dig into okay, who is my customers? So and there is where there are some pitfalls for sure, when you are dealing with manual filtering basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
at the other hand, you can still do sorry about that. You can still do a manual one, but it depends also what you are filtering against. So which lists are you using? So
right.
sometimes these are being updated on a daily basis. And are you doing that update on a daily basis, or is it like weekly or so? So you never know, and you
Yeah.
might
And
miss
that's,
some of
yeah, it's going to be
the
very, very man-hour intensive if you're doing it that manually as well. And of course, the whole point of
protect.
sanction screening is to see if your client is on that, or on any of those main lists, or any list that you are obligated to comply with. And so that's understanding your settings is very important, and how you're searching a name. And so we use the name Steve Rogers as a test on our system when we're looking at different screening providers. And I use the example Steve Rogers. It's both two very common names. I can get 112 results, but if I'm just searching from the name, but if I search for the name and the country or date of birth, I can reduce that down. But those could still be negative, or what some people call false positives. So I call those results, and you're still having to spend a lot of time looking at each of those results that are returned and trying to identify, is this the same Steve Rogers that is my client, as an example. And of course, understanding your settings, like how, for those of you who are using automated systems, because this is the other thing that I'm working with our customers, is we're always working with them to adjust their settings on their screening tool so that we can kind of reduce those false positives, but still not miss a name, and it's harder than it looks. You think, well, it's like, well, just pull this lever here and pull this lever here, and you think you're going to get it, but there's always something that's always a little bit off. Whether you're getting too many results and you're wasting your time, your staff's time reviewing false positives, or you're not getting a result on somebody who was sanctioned, and that's particularly hard with Chinese names as well. Is one example that I put here.
Yes. Oh yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And just to go back, just to add to your point there. Just to add to your point there, I see also that it depends also which list are you using. Are you using adverse media? Because most of the time in the adverse media you will not get like the date of birth or the country. You will just get some links, and that makes it a little bit difficult in order you to determine indeed if it's the same customer.
Right.
So,
and for those of you who aren't familiar with the term adverse media, negative news databases, they are out there and available. And what Ulrich said is there's usually bots, and I kind of mentioned that here. Talk about some of these screening solutions. What they're doing is they're just using these bots that go out, search the internet, find some sources, and then put it all in their database. And and again, going back to the Steve Rogers name, well, they might find a newspaper that's online in the UK that mentions a Steve Rogers of Buckinghamshire was arrested for embezzling from his company, but there's no date of birth in that article. There's no national, we don't know if his full name is Steve Rogers, or what. So we don't have an address. We don't get a passport number. So you're then left as the analyst going, well, is this my Steve Rogers? And then you're trying to find out if your Steve Rogers ever lived there, ever worked for that company. And that's what Ulrich and I were kind of talking about too at one point. Sometimes the result might mean you have to go back to your client and ask for some information. And we're going to talk about that in the next slide over. The other thing that you're also wanting to look at is what are the sources that your screening solution provider is looking at? Do they go behind paywalls? So of course, a lot of these newspapers that are going online, they're behind paywalls, and some do not, some will, or as long as maybe they'll pay for a Wall Street Journal, but they won't pay. The Cayman Compass is an example, and it's one of the arguments I have to a screening provider that we use is, please, can you go behind the paywall of the Cayman Compass, because it is a credible, relevant source for the Caribbean, for the Cayman Islands. The other one that I've seen too is they might be very focused on the bigger jurisdictions, and if you're in a small jurisdiction, they might not be picking up on your local PEPs, for instance, or what your paper is saying. So that's again just one of those. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, did I lose you, Ulrich? You still there?
That's a term that is very. Sometimes we are only looking at like the sanctioned parties.
Yeah. Yeah. So whenever you're looking at your screening settings, again, you might not be just looking at sanctions. You might be looking at adverse media. So for those of you who are managing the compliance function, you really need to know these sanctions. I mean, these screening settings to see what other kind of results that you're getting. And of course, we also talked about like I said, that fuzzy matching, which can be very hard to get right. And it sometimes it takes, like I said, pulling a lever here and pulling a lever there to see how that impacts your screening results. So these are some of the screening pitfalls that I've come across. Ulrich, I'll let you start first. I mean, what because you probably do more, you probably see even more of these. What are some of the pitfalls that you've seen or you experience?
Okay, so just to add to what you have seen, basically, just to go back to the PEPs. So are we looking at local PEPs? It depends on your regulation also, the local PEPs, the foreign PEPs, and what are you screening against? Which lists are you screening against? So if you see, like for instance, just to add to what the example that you gave, that sometimes you have like a real so-called real match. So the name is, just to go back, it was Steve what is the name, for instance? You have
Steve Rogers is the name
Steve
that I use as an
Rogers.
example. Yeah.
So you have Steve Rogers, it hits against another Steve Rogers, but when you go to the details of the sanction party, you will see that there is, yeah, some links going to adverse media, and it might be Steve Rogers living in, let's take it in Curacao,
Mm-hmm.
okay? But yeah, the Steve Rogers that you have in your database is also living in Curacao, but you do not have any address, you do not have anything. And on the other hand, you need to see, okay, where is maybe that sanctioned party Steve Roger, for instance, what is being said in the link? Maybe it goes to what he did, maybe a fraud at the company, and you need to look at that company in order for you to determine if that same Steve Roger is your customer. You might be going back. You might need to go back to the customer and
Yeah.
ask them, listen, can we need some further information on maybe on where you were employed or where you are employed currently, because maybe your database is not so up to date. So you need to go back in order for just for you to update your programs and also the customer documentation in order for you to
Right.
detect indeed if it is the real Steve Rogers. If that is the case, yeah, then it's some decision to need to make in order for you to review the account in order to close your account if it comes that way. But another pitfall that you are seeing on a daily basis is um, uh, like if you go back to the Chinese,
Mm-hmm.
that is part is very difficult because depending on where you live, but that can hit you very hard. And
Right.
like, let me just give an example. So we are living here in Curacao. We are in the Caribbean. We have a lot of Latins. We are very tied with the Latin America. So, for instance, you will get an Ana, maybe a person called Ana, which is maybe their AKA is Ana, might be. It might be their name too. But for that small three-letter word, you're gonna have maybe like 500 hits. That might be, but and there is where the fuzzy logic come into action to see, okay, where can I go in order to reduce those false positives? So is it the Anna only related to a AKA, or is it real Anna Rogers or whatever? So that is where sometimes you will need to look at your fuzzy logic in order to get the correct ones, and as you said, not to miss some of these hits,
Right.
which can be difficult too.
Right.
Another, you wanted to say something, sorry?
Well, I was just going to say I just saw a question pop up, and
Yeah.
he's asking if you go back to the client to seek information to positively exclude them as a match, could that be a form of tipping off? I'm going to say no. I would. Oh, I mean, I would be careful. I wouldn't say, hey, we've got this particular hit or whatever. I need to exclude you. I would just say, hey, we really need to get more information from you. Um, to get our compliance. I'm sure you've had that experience where you've had to go back to a client or customer to get more
But to
information.
tell you
How
to
do you
tell you
word it?
also, yes, exactly. It depends what the information are you're looking for. So
Mhm.
sometimes you might have you might get this information maybe in an account review. You just do a review of the account. But if you have to go to the client, um, you might be looking specifically what type of questions you are asking in order not to tip them, you know, and
Okay.
it depends on the circumstance. What are you looking for? What type of information are you looking for? Because at the end of the day, we are living basically on a small island here. Okay, if it is maybe an account or a larger county, might be a little bit more difficult. But here on the island, everybody knows each other, for instance. But on a larger country, yeah, it might be difficult, and they will easily. It depends who they're calling. Maybe it is an account manager calling them, saying, "Hey, listen, we need some update of your account. Can you bring me some information like your last salary, and because we are updating our account." But if a compliance officer or a sanction officer call him, that's a different flavor of the of the call, you know. So
Right, right.
they might think there's something wrong. So
Right.
I
And
think it's
it could be, as you mentioned, it depends on what kind of information you're finding. So again, we talk about, if my Stephen Rogers finds out that, if I see an article that in San Francisco they were accused of embezzlement, and I know my guy's now living in Maryland, then
yeah.
I could maybe ask for some employment history to see, did he ever live in San Francisco? What companies did he work for in the past? So something like that could help me identify, and that I would think would not be a tipping off if we just go, look, we just need to get some background history on the companies you work for, kind of thing, or as you say, previous payrolls. Yeah, it is sometimes very, very hard to exclude a false positive. Like I said, unless you do go back and get more information. So you would have to be very careful with how you pose your question. I don't know, because the thing is I don't know if it would be tipping off. And sorry, I'm just kind of speaking out loud here, because the tipping off is about the
But
money laundering element, right? I mean, we're not really.
exactly. Actually, yeah, you're just doing know your client basically.
Mhm.
So in what sense, for instance, yeah, it depends. Again, what you said is correct. It depends what are you looking for. So if it is an
Right,
embezzlement, it's a fraud. But
right,
if it is a money laundering case, the moment that you ask that customer any information, he knows already that it might be him. So
yeah,
and because he knows most of these customers doing wrong things, they know that they are listed on any kind of list, so they know.
right, yeah.
So
Because as somebody else just kind of commented, they said tipping off usually occurs if a suspicion has been reported, and so we're not reporting anything. Um,
no,
so
no,
so there's no really
you're
no. I
just
mean, I
you're
guess we're
just
still trying to do more KYC to determine if it's a
exactly,
crime.
you're just know your customer. That's it.
Hmm.
That's it.
Yeah. So I think we got a little bit more wiggle room, so as we're gathering more KYC. So yeah, I think that's interesting. Um, okay, we're just over half the hour. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of talk about here on this slide before we move into QA?
Um, so there was one question, basic, or there's one point there on how frequently are you screening again? So daily,
Yeah.
yearly, and it really depends what type of customers you have. So if you are dealing, for instance, with a lot of international clients,
Hmm.
you might be needing to do that on a daily basis.
Right.
Um, no, I wouldn't say yearly. It's kind of not an option, but there. Okay, if you go back, still it depends on the type of customer you have. So a weekly might be a possibility. A daily is basically a daily screening, and there where we speak already about that is an automated program.
Right.
Daily screening with manually, that's a lot of work, and I don't think that is efficient too. So
No,
uh,
no, it's
uh,
not.
uh,
And
are
it's
you
funny that you mentioned
likely?
that yearly though, because I mean, I have come across, firms, especially the smaller firms with smaller client databases who were doing, they would screen somebody when they onboarded them, and then they would just do a yearly re-screening because again, they were very small. They weren't investing in the different screening tools that are out there. And of course, that just can't be done these days anymore. So there's definitely going to be more of a move to, as you say, more either daily. And of course, if you're going to use a screening provider that sometimes, you could set your settings. We used to do ours with our silo users. We would say, oh, if you're a smaller firm and you're happy with weekly, do it weekly. But now it's kind of like, look, there's no additional cost. Might as well do it daily. Get your alerts if there's a potential hit, and just do it daily. So because it doesn't run up their costs anymore than if they were doing it once a year, once a month.
Yes, but another advice would be also, if you have your customer database, you know who you have in your customer, and you see sanctions maybe coming out against Russia. You know that, okay, if I have some customers, related to Russia, I might be doing a search on them, on
Right.
on a daily basis.
Right.
So maybe it's a risk-based approach. So where are my risks? I see sanctions coming out of Russia. Okay, I have some Russian clients. I know I need to do some, some screening against these customers. So it depends how you deal with it, and you see on a daily basis. You have to be every day looking at all these sanctions, because it's really evolving on a daily basis, and it's changing and it's continuous, as you may see. But and where do I have some risks? So and there is where identifying your risks where they are will drive you seeing, okay, if it is sufficient for me to do it on a daily basis or a monthly or yearly. Just speaking about yearly, maybe you have in your process, okay, that I'm doing for certain clients, I'm doing a yearly review of the account. So you're gonna review it only on a yearly basis to go back. But there are some risks that you can run that might something has happened maybe during that year period, and and you and your customer were involved. So and those are the risks that you can run.
Yeah,
So,
and those risks are getting exceedingly, as somebody else comments here, exceedingly dangerous. So that's perfect perfect wording for not doing screening daily, or at least way more frequently. So especially for even for the smaller firms, and I know that price is key. The cost of screening is key, but again, I think whenever at the end of the day, you've got to be showing your regulators that you are doing the screening, and you got to be able to document, which we'll kind of move into a little bit there. We're getting about a quarter, 20 minutes to the top of the hour, so I do want to move into Q&A sessions a little bit. Was there anything else that you wanted to add one last time, Ulrich, that you wanted to really?
No, I don't think. I think we cover it's. I just wanted to add basically, this is like a basic session where we cover some part of it. 1 hour is not enough for sanction, for sure not sanction screening.
Yeah.
But I look forward for the questions to come. So.
Yeah. So somebody did reach out to me with a question about an hour before the session started today, and I do recommend that for our regular listeners. Please, if you know we're going to cover a topic and you've got a question, don't wait until the actual live event. Please email me. Most of you guys can reach me on LinkedIn, or of course, all of our silo people can reach. My email. But it's out there. Please do reach out to me with these questions in advance to give us a chance to research whatever you need. And this is one that came in about an hour before the session. I thought it was really good. He's asking basically if he's got a customer or a client who banks, if I'm understanding correctly, if they bank with a sanctioned bank, can you still make a payment to that client who holds that account with the bank, because it's the bank that's sanctioned, not necessarily the client who holds an account. And we talked about this, and he was asking for, is there any information out there? Ulrich, you mentioned there's FAQs for OFAC sanctions.
Exactly.
Did you
Correct.
have any other response to this question?
No, basically I went to look for it also a little bit, but I'm just to give a small detail about that, with relations to, for sure, OFAC sanctions, US sanctions. There is the frequent asked page basically, which for every country or sanctions that they have produced, there is something that might help you for sure dealing with those sanctioned countries or entities. So to that respect, um, based on the answer of this question, you might be referring to that particular. If there is one for sure that I saw that maybe might help, which is the frequently asked question 978. There is where it details basically what type of questions are allowed to these sanctions entities, and by a US or by a non-US person. So feel free to look at that, and that will might help for sure. So I just researched basically a while ago the answer to this question, and I saw that the frequently asked question 978 might the one that you need to look at.
Okay. And I was actually looking at those frequently asked questions as well on the OFAC. You still have to dig down. It's not one of those, the answer is not going to just pop up and say, yes, you can, or no, you can't. You still have to really kind of dig and research. And this is where you might even need to get some legal advice if you're not a lawyer yourself, or go to somebody who's got a little bit more experience with sanctions and the special licenses and general licenses out there. So
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
but definitely go to the FAQs of your different sanctions. You know, whoever's issuing the sanctions, they will provide some FAQs on their websites. The
Kimberly,
question? We've got a
just to
few
add,
questions. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, okay. Just
I
a
was gonna
small
say,
thing. Um, on the directives, general licenses, those are very tricky. So you need to indeed um, take a good read of these, you know, what is allowed, what is not allowed, in order for you to understand if a payment is allowed or not, or dealing with that sanctioned country. So it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of digging in order to understand if it is allowed. Even that, you might be go wrong sometimes because there is a new
right.
license coming out maybe in a minute or 1 hour thereafter. So
Yeah. And let me ask you this. I mean, kind of going back to this, and I'm thinking in terms of, let's say, a fund administrator, and they've got they say have a client who's with VTP, and I'm just using this as an example. Um, would that fund administrator perhaps call their bank and say, hey, would this transaction happen? I mean, could they call the bank
yeah,
and get
that's a very
their
good
feedback?
question. That's a very good question, Kimberly. Um,
Mhm.
what I can tell you is a correspondent bank will never tell you that a certain transaction is allowed or not. So you might be doing all your homework, seeing that it is allowed maybe through the general license or not. And
Mhm.
then when you send it, because you depend on the correspondent banking, that they will say, you know, we are not going to ruin this risk, so we are not processing this transaction
Okay,
because
so
of
it's not even just
and
if it's legal or not, it's what your correspondent bank's risk appetite is too. And of course, it's getting less and less, they're getting less less of a risk appetite. So they might even block it even if you think it's legal. What would be somebody's path to make
it,
it happen if they really believe, no, this is legal, it's not sanctioned? Do they have any
you
do they
know
have any avenue?
basically the only way that you have avenue is like if it is clearly stated into a general license or you have a license. So
Okay.
if you are in doubt that maybe this transaction can be blocked, you can either ask for a license or you need to look if it is specifically mentioned in a general license in order, and then you will put that general license, you know, number into the Swift message in order for you to process the transaction. And then
Okay.
the correspondent bank will look specifically at the general license because all those are published. They will look at the number and they see, okay, this transaction is allowed, so it will go through. It might be
Okay.
that they're saying, okay, we do not want to run any risk, and they will say, no, we will not process it. But actually you cannot do anything about it because at the end of the day you depend on the correspondent bank. If they don't want to do it, they will not do it.
Okay. And I guess another avenue is having your client apply for a license, correct?
Exactly. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So that's what I said. So you either have you apply for a license, specific license for that particular transaction, and then you have a real approval from the U.S. government in this case in order to process the transaction. So,
Okay.
and if the correspondent bank does not want to process the transaction, then okay, that is something that is basically you need to go back to the correspondent bank and say why is that not allowed, even though I have a specific license here.
Okay. A couple other questions have come in. One says, except for the U.S., do any other countries have extraterritorial reach?
To my knowledge, no. It's the most it's the U.S. one. And even though you can speak about the extraterritorial reach, in some event, I know that the EU is kind of blocking this extraterritorial too, in order not to, put their own European entities or individuals into in a wrong position. Because at the end of the day, um, it's a U.S. sanction. If it is a transaction in euro, it might have some U.S. element in that, or maybe some U.S. sanction evasion. But at the end of the day, it's a transaction in euro. But you can still, the U.S. can still and do a request and saying, okay, if that transaction is maybe sanctioned or not. So it's a very difficult matter. But to go back, basically, as far as I know, it's only the U.S. who have extraterritorial effect on their sanctions, and not the other ones.
Okay. All right, great. Somebody's about to put me in the minefield, definitely, with one of their questions. Actually, I've got two people. All right, so one question kind of comes in. Would sanctions extend to a board member? And I'll even say, we could extend that to, shareholders or even key management of a sanctioned entity, even if they are not sanctioned themselves. I would say not, but it's still very risky if the board member themselves is not named. Is that correct?
The board member themselves, no. But maybe if that board member is a 50% holder of a sanctioned company, shareholder, they will be also sanctioned.
They will be also sanctioned usually. Okay. But it's okay. Let's say if I'm a retail bank and I've got a board member, if I have a board member who is, like I said, maybe they don't have any shareholdings. Well, I don't know if that's ever the case, but let's say if they don't have any. Yeah, they're just a board member or a director, but they don't have any shareholding. Ooh, that's a tough one. I would. I mean, I guess I would.
Just Kimberly, just one question there. So what the question is, who is sanctioned? The entity itself?
The entity is sanctioned, but not the board member has not been named as a sanctioned person.
But the question comes, okay, do I want to deal with a sanctioned company? So that company probably would have been restricted, or the asset was freeze already, basically, in your entity. If it was, for instance, if it was a financial institution, if it is you are dealing, if you have a sanctioned entity, you are obliged basically in the laws in order to do the asset freeze. Depends what type of sanction it is. So if it is maybe a listed person on the OFAC, for instance, or maybe on an EU list, you are obliged to do an asset freeze on that company or that customer. So basically, you will not be dealing with that particular entity any longer.
Right, but
you see where I'm going?
Yeah, but she's asking about the board member. So the board member of that sanctioned entity is her customer, not the sanctioned entity itself?
Oh,
Does she need to be
okay,
freezing the board members' assets?
no, no, no,
No,
no.
no.
Sorry, I understood that not correctly. So I thought that the entity was our customer. So if the
No, just
board
the board
member
member.
is your customer, that board member will be for sure held as a high risk person, because this only a
Yeah, I
board.
would exactly. I would make them high risk, and the other thing I would do is any transactions that proceed or kind of approved with that board member, I would definitely get it
That
signed off by senior
Yeah,
management or a risk manager, somebody. Yeah,
exactly. So
I'd
that
get.
board
Yeah,
member will be flagged in your whole database for customer transaction filtering, whatever it is. So
yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'm just kind of looking through. Yes, yeah, somebody comments, yeah, provided that board member doesn't have an account at a sanctioned bank, yeah. But yeah, so she's explained, she goes, the board member sits on many boards, but not an entity to you that they're providing services to. Okay, yeah, so she did clarify that. Okay, so here's another question. If a company is sanctioned, does it not automatically sanctions them? Oh, sorry, that's not, she was asking if the board members were automatically sanctioned. I don't think so,
no,
because no, yeah, they might not. Um,
no.
all right, so sorry, the questions are coming in fast and furious here. Somebody says we have a client, and I hope I'll see you guys all back, because we are going to announce a second follow-up webinar here, because we know this was going to go over an hour. But she writes, we have a client, which is the local company with Russian UBOs, ultimate beneficial owners. Should we terminate this relationship because of the latest sanctions against Russia? And that is a question many people have asked me. And I have, here's my response. It's going to depend on what your board, what your management, what kind of risk are they comfortable with?
Exactly. So it's
I,
about
I,
about this
yeah,
appetite.
yeah, it's about your risk appetite. And I even know some
Yeah.
firms who are accepting Russian clients, because those Russian clients are getting de-risked by their current service providers. So they're growing their business by accepting Russian clients. So if they are not sanctioned, and just because they're Russian, their money's still good, I guess. I mean, but again, it is down to your risk appetite. It is down to a document, make them high risk. You have to be very careful that they are not helping
Front.
somebody who is
Yeah.
sanctioned. So you're going to have to do a lot of due diligence, a lot of digging. Just because they're not sanctioned does not mean that they're good to go. You got to make sure that they don't have any connections to somebody who is sanctioned. So you got to think about, do you have and think about this too, because I've actually had a regulator point this out to me, that if a firm has a significant high risk client base, they're going to want to make sure that you've got the staff that have the expertise to manage that risk. So they're going to be looking very closely at your staff talent, your compliance staff talent, your analyst talent, and they're going to look very, very closely at your due diligence. So you're going to have to make sure that your due diligence and your KYC is on point. And you're going to have to document. It's the rule of compliance there. Okay, we got 2 more minutes. Let me see if I can find some. I've got somebody else. She says, yachts purported to be owned by Russian oligarchs, non-designated, that we are seeing in the news being seized in port. Is there a register list that confirm a yacht, ship, aircraft is sanctioned apart from OFAC and OFSI vessel search? So are you familiar at all with any kind of vessels and aircraft searching?
There are some public lists for sure for vessels. I do not know about aircrafts. For vessels, I know, but because of the IMO, so the IMO, that bit I do not know if those are accurate. The ones that are accurate, for sure, you have to pay for. But free sites, in order for you to, I do not know if those information are. Sometimes I look at on certain websites to see, you know, the the track that basically the vessel is going. But registers specifically, I do not know of any which is free. That's the main word, free.
Right, free. Yeah,
That
exactly.
do not need to pay for.
Yeah.
So and
All
and
right.
then most of
So,
the time,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, just to add, those most of the time, if it is yeah, you will see it on the list. That's the only way. Order registration list, I do not know about them free, if they are free or not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So top of the hour, so Ulrich and I did say we would do a follow-up sanctions 2, more in depth, more Q&A as well on 27th of April. So you'll be getting those, all of those that have registered or here today. You will see that link. So please keep an eye out on your emails. Also follow Silo Compliance system on LinkedIn. We announce all of our webinars there as well. I'm going to give you guys some homework. That is, here's your list. This is a handout, but of course I'll attach it as well to that email list that goes out for you to go away, because a lot of these people, a lot of people do not know your very specific screening, what you're screening, how you're screening, how frequently you're screening, what are your parameters for screening, what lists, or if you're doing more than just sanctions lists, if you're doing negative news, law enforcement, disqualified directors list, politically exposed persons list, things like that. So here's some questions. Just go through, find out the information, and think too about how are you documenting all of this for your next regulatory visit, because that's ultimately your goal, is you are trying to protect your company from regulatory fines. Of course, you're also trying to, stop transacting with somebody who is sanctioned or who is doing money laundering or terrorist financing. But it is all about the documenting of your processes. So take these questions, find out some more information about your screening parameters and your screening settings, and then we are going to do some like I said, we'll do this follow-up, and I'll send you that registration link. Tom, we've got one more polling question, and then there is also another webinar that we'll be announcing as well. So stay on for that next polling question if you don't mind. And that is, you know your screening settings, and I'm asking you, how well do you know your screenings? Very well, somewhat, not at all, not applicable. Maybe you don't use a screening tool, or you're not personally involved. I just kind of want to know if I've kind of got you thinking, if Ulrich and I got you thinking. So, and again, for the next webinars and any future webinars, please don't hesitate to email me with any questions you have before an event. That, again, it allows us to do some research and find some specific answers for you. Great. Okay, so I am showing about 50% are saying that you somewhat know your settings. 35% say you know it very well. It's awesome. 10% are saying it's not applicable. So that's great. So for those 50% of you that said somewhat, hopefully today's homework will help you go away and know what questions to ask and start documenting it for a regulatory visit, because you know your regulators, your next audits are going to focus on screening as well. I'm talking with a couple of people about data privacy compliance as well. So we will be announcing a webinar on data privacy compliance and GDPR. So keep an eye out for that. And again, thank you to our audience. I really appreciate it. I know your time is valuable. I hope you found today's broadcast useful. Again, it's important that you have that well-documented policies and procedures in place in order to pass the regulatory inspection. And as I mentioned at the beginning, being able to demonstrate to your regulator how you're complying with AML regulations is key to reducing that risk of penalties. So if you are still relying on manual systems or multiple systems, we encourage you to take a look at Silo Compliance System. There is a short 2-minute video that we will play so you can see some of its highlights. It is a system I wish I'd had as a compliance officer and MLRO. And for those of you who don't know, I am the co-founder of Silo. And of course, many of its features and the reports and the dashboards in it are very much the things that I wish I'd had when I was a compliance officer. Thomas, he is offering an incentive to book a demo in April. So please do reach out to him to schedule some time with him. And that's it for today's broadcast. Again, please stay, for those of you who are interested in Silo, we got this 2-minute video to follow in the next slide. Thank you, Ulrich, for being with us. I look forward to having you back on 27th of April. I anticipate a lot of questions that we'll have.
So
I think it'll be a really good one.
thanks for you. My pleasure. So we look forward for the next one.
Great, thank you again. And again, don't forget to connect with Ulrich and myself on LinkedIn. And again, I'll send over our LinkedIn links so we're easy to find. And thank you again for joining us. Until next time, this is Kimberly Smith, and I'm signing off.
Anti-money laundering compliance and customer and vendor onboarding involves multiple processes that must be done correctly and by the right people in the most efficient way. The tasks include gathering customer and vendor ID and verification documents, screening against sanctions and politically exposed persons lists, analyzing any reputational risk, periodic monitoring to assess any changes and updating due diligence, and staff training on money laundering, terrorist financing, bribery and corruption awareness and risks, as well as keeping them up to date on your policies and procedures and new regulatory requirements. In addition to the onboarding processes being strictly followed and documented, management must have access to critical compliance metrics and information to steer the company through regulatory waters and mitigate customer and other risks. With Silo Compliance System, these obligations become much more efficient. With Silo, your staff can enter the customer's information and upload due diligence documents and any other documents that you require. Key information entered about your customer automatically calculates a risk score, a calculation using a risk-based approach determined by you at initial implementation of Silo. In addition, if you have screening enabled, when the customer's name is first entered into Silo, the name is checked against sanctions, politically exposed persons lists, and adverse media. You'll see results of screening immediately and can review any potential hits right away. And with screening enabled, your customers and vendors are continuously monitored for any sanctions advisories, helping you get ahead of any potential reputational risks. No company is too small to benefit from using Silo. Even if your onboarding processes seem under control today, if one key staff member becomes unavailable or there is any increase in your customer portfolio, compliance with strict onboarding and review processes can quickly overwhelm a small company and put you at risk. Plus, implementing Silo can reduce the need to hire additional staff to manage compliance obligations and reduce your risk of non-compliance regulatory penalties and continued inspections. No one goes through an inspection or audit with great ease, but several users have reported that their inspections went more smoothly and with Silo they had improved outcomes. Reach out to us today to schedule a demo of Silo.